My name is Carringtone Kinyanjui. I am a student at the University of Manchester. I was a student at the University of Nairobi, where I started where I studied physics, specifically astrophysics. But my main interests were in theoretical physics, basically how to apply the concepts of mathematics to physics. And then over time, I started getting very interested in programming as a concept, and how to communicate to computers, which maybe we will talk about hapo mbeleni. And then I started looking at artificial intelligence during my master's, when I was studying my master's in the University of Nairobi. I applied for a small conference in South Africa, got a grant to attend it, and attended it. I never felt so challenged in my life, or sinking very deep, as you may wish to describe it. And then I just got very interested and continued practicing it. I survived the conference and possibly thrived kidogo, and then came back and decided to invest a lot of my time in studying artificial intelligence. This was in 2017, 18, I think. I am now in my PhD. I'm studying social networks, and I'm using partially some of the methods of artificial intelligence. I will explain this in detail later. Natural language processing. These are the LLMs you have heard about, a product of natural language processing, and social network analysis. But my specialty, I'm looking at scientific social networks right now. So that's a bit of my history. I am currently making a full transition, not a transition of gender, but a transition of specialty. I'm trying to move in completely into artificial intelligence, and become essentially a specialist in artificial intelligence.
It's very good that you started with that tone because you've given us a brief history of how and where you are in terms of AI. But because of the general masses who are consuming our media, I would like you to give us a brief history.
Thank you very much, Daktari. Let us start with the concept of intelligence before we get to artificial intelligence. Can we start with the concept of intelligence?
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah. Intelligence is just the ability to learn. Sindio, how you come to understand certain things about your environment, and if possible, about yourself. That is primarily intelligence. But what is learning? Learning is the ability to update yourself. So the donkey, the cow, you have learned something about your environment, that if I do this action, I'm likely to avoid pain. So you have updated your internal state depending on that external stimuli. So that is learning. The ability to do this updating is what we call intelligence. So if we want machines to do the same thing, we also need to somehow find a way of designing it artificially into the machine, into the system. And this combination of concepts is what we call artificial intelligence. Now, some scholars here might not be very happy with that definition, as I normally like saying. The problem here is that intelligence, life, consciousness, these very, very heavy things, religion, are mostly better defined by what they do. Sijui kama mnakumbuka kitabu ya biology ya form 1 ilikuwa inasema something like life excretes, life reproduces, life moves, life looks for food, life perspires or breathes. Rather than defining life, it tells you what life does. So I'd like us to also start thinking about intelligence that way. Not what intelligence is, but what intelligence does, and how it behaves, its characteristics. And if you start looking at it that way, it is much better to get a grasp of intelligence, and by that connection, artificial intelligence. It helps you understand also why a computer can be intelligent, because by this very strict definition of action, rather than can it be intelligent like a human being, can it be intelligent sijui kama nini, can it really be intelligent? These questions are not useful when you're looking at the functionality of intelligence. And this is where I want to nudge people towards. So looking at the functionality and characteristics of intelligence rather than thresholds of intelligence. Asante.
Very well. I like that you're saying that you want to promote and push people towards the functionality of intelligence, because in these spaces there are a lot of qualified people who are in very, very good careers that can be really aided by AI. So we'll get to that later. But for the time being, I would like to push you towards the geeky part of AI. Tell us about the high level discussion of AI without getting too much into the weeds, but just give us a little tidbit of the history from a high level perspective.
Yes. Thank you very much. Artificial intelligence has been with us for a very, very long time, for roughly 70 years, by the way. Ever since people started thinking about mechanical calculation, essentially, people have been thinking about mechanical intelligence. This begins with Turing, almost just after the World War, and even earlier, with actually a woman, very interestingly, called Ada Lovelace from Britain. So what happens is that these people start thinking about the possibility of automating essentially intelligence. Can we train machines to think the way human beings think? But there's a problem. This is a problem that human beings often meet, not just in science, but even in society. The problem of you being in a mind that is supposed to be in the future. So these visionaries who are seeing the future started to discuss concepts that could not be made practical then. And therefore, any attempts that were used, any attempts that were developed to make their work practical immediately failed. Now, I'm sure some of you know why. For example, the computers of the 40s. All of you in this space have either laptops or computers that are hundreds, if not thousands of times more powerful than the computers that were used to calculate the things in, for example, the Second World War. There were computers used to calculate things. They were very rudimentary. And just after the Second World War, you have computers that are much, much more powerful than those ones. So it was not possible to implement the conceptual requirements of artificial intelligence then. And people tried, people made some advances, but it was not very impactful. So in the 1980s, there arose a generation of computers, wale wamesoma computer high school, I think they're called second or third generation computers, that basically could make it possible for you to do large numbers of calculations very, very comfortably. Alafu hiyo kitu, hiyo hype ya artificial intelligence ikarudi from the initial problems za the 1960s. So people started getting hyped up, but immediately it became understood that it would be very hard to do this just because of the way they were approaching it. So the specialists, the computer scientists, were pursuing top-down in artificial intelligence. In essence, trying to give the computer the rules by which it can behave, and then observing how it behaves under certain conditions. This didn't work. This proved not to be very efficient. Na watu pia waka-abandon artificial intelligence for a while. So it never made it to industry. It only stopped in very, very few universities, especially in Canada, Europe, and the United States. And then after that, what happened in the 2000s was the rise of the internet. Now, the rise of the internet can be seen as something very strange to be helpful to artificial intelligence. But actually, the internet, you can look at the internet in this regard as a bank of data, as a bank of free data. And this development of this data helped, taken together with the rise of, I think, fifth generation computers, helped combine these things to make bottom up artificial intelligence possible. In the case of bottom up, what you're doing is giving the computer data and you give it maximum freedom possible. You give it a network, sort of. Alafu unaipea data and you let the network adjust itself slowly by slowly while reading up or learning the trends in the data. After a while, you start realizing that the pattern in your network, in your artificial network, matches the patterns of the data. And not only does it match the patterns of the data, it can be used to create new inferences, new patterns in new data. It can be made to understand new data. And this is what you call AI nowadays, more formally artificial neural networks. Na hapo ndo tumefika. Basically, we have found that this quote unquote bottom up approach, where you let the computer learn from the data, is generally more efficient.
When you're back at home and you're trying to explain maybe to your father, your mother, who is also religious and is wondering, why are you trying to recreate intelligence? Like, why should you recreate intelligence? Or what is the need for recreating artificial intelligence? Yeah.
I actually talked to my aunts about this and they ask, why are you trying to create life? My understanding of the situation is yes, in fact, we can understand these things not really as forms of life, but as forms of intelligence. The reason we are trying to do it is that computers have two things that they really beat us up on. One, the ability to update their entire architecture. Let's say I want to change my political views. Let's say I want to change and I want to be, I don't know, I want to be a nationalist. I want to put the interests of Kenya beyond the interests of the continent. Although right now I don't think this is possible or useful, let's say I want to do that. It will be an incredibly destructive energy tasking process. For a computer, it is not. Now, this gives us power. For example, if you want to build a translator of African languages to African languages, maybe it could take you, if you had the right computer and the right data, it could take you a week or two. That is one thing. It really amplifies our ability. Just like the aeroplane amplifies our ability to travel, artificial intelligence will amplify our ability to learn cognitive tasks, for example, like speaking, like teaching, like all of these things. Another very interesting thing that has come up, cancer research, for example. Artificial intelligence haezi lala. It can read all cancer papers maybe in a week and understand where there are gaps in research and what could be done to give us a breakthrough. And there are people already experimenting on this. So immediately you start to see what computers can do when augmented with intelligence. They can take us very far, very fast. And this is useful for our immediate problems. Yeah, climate change is another. So it is partially the problems, but I don't like looking at it only as problems, but also opportunities. The continent is not just a problem, a place of problems. It's also a place of opportunities. So what can we use this technology to exploit the opportunities in the continent and in the world? Yeah.
And actually, you had started giving us examples of application that maybe we can relate to. And I think you can give us a few examples of things that we use in our daily life that also take advantage of artificial intelligence and apply it in normal life.
the control of traffic in a country, in a city, in a large city like Nairobi, ultimately can be optimized by artificial intelligence. AI is very adaptive. So traffic control is something that I think is very important. Facebook, how you know your friends and friends of friends, but those are some of the practical, real life, sometimes even life and death examples where artificial intelligence is important.
So, Kinyanjui, I'd like us to talk a little bit about large language models. Let's say, for example, ChatGPT. Is there possible of making native ama Luo, for example, because most people in this space are Luos from Kenya, is there a possibility of making a Luo ChatGPT?
First, for those who don't know, an LLM is a type of artificial intelligence called a large language model. So artificial intelligence, kwanza, is a very big, very vague, very cloudy term. They are models of language. In that, zinajaribu to create an understanding of language within computers. And because kuna rule ya science, there are no such things as correct or right or true models. They are only useful models. You can only engineer a good model on the basis of your data. And that is what OpenAI, that is what Facebook, that is what now Twitter ama X wanajaribu kufanya. Kumbuka that computer inaelewa vitu mbili kwa hii dunia, ama wenye hawajui, inaelewa on or off, 1 or 0. Meaning that computer ultimately inaelewa two numbers, because you can use 1 and 0 to create any number. So for you to get a computer ielewe language, lazima uifunze patterns, lazima uchange language essentially into numbers. Alafu computer ita learn the patterns za hizi numbers. Alafu ikielewa the patterns za hizi numbers, imeelewa by that connection the pattern of the language which is represented by the numbers. And that's what computers essentially do. Zina connect patterns za numbers. Vile nimewaambia, zina connect patterns za mapicha, for example. Zinaweza angalia sura ya mtu ziseme huyu ni East African, zinaweza angalia sura ya mtu ziseme huyu ni European. Just the same way, zinaweza angalia word iseme hii word inafaa ifit hapa na ifit hapa. So that is a language model. Imekuja kueleweka that the larger you make these things, the more efficient they become.
Clearly define some benefits and some dangers or some disadvantages of AI.
Asante sana. Sasa wacha to systematize, tuweke at least to summarize some of the benefits I was talking about. Na inaweza anza na hizi language models. Niko sure mnajua juu ya majirani wenyu Wasuba, si ndio? Wasuba. They are Basuba. Language yao imeanza kupotea. Because less and less people are speaking it. Na unajua language comes from economy. The reason sisi wote hapa, almost all of us know how to speak English, it is because it helps us in our day-to-day lives in Kenya and around the world. Inatusaidia, inatupea access to spaces that we cannot have access without knowing how to speak English. So language is about economy. Na juu Wasuba wanakaa karibu na Wajaluo, I think, na Wakisia ama Waluya nimesahau. Eri wajifunze kulearn hizi languages, pali wanaweza trade freely, wakae freely, wakuwe comfortable kuliko walearn Kisuba. So over time, over generations, young people wameanza kujifunza Kijaluo, I think ni Kikisi, na wanalenga Kisuba. Just the same way mimi nilianza kujifunza kuongea Kiswahili because nilikuwa nakaa Tao na Sheng. It was more beneficial to me kujifunza Kiswahili na Sheng rather than kujifunza Kikuyu enye mama yangu pekee out of 100. Nililelewa Kakamega. Mimi ni Mkikuyu wa diaspora, nililelewa Kakamega. Sasa sikupata time ya kujifunza Kikuyu, juu haikuwa inanisaidia from my day to day life. Sasa nilijua majina za mahindi, majina za ugali kwa Kiluya, Kiisuka before nijue kwa Kikuyu. Why? Because hainisaidii. Mwanadamu ultimately unataka kujisaidia, na mwili na brain yako inajifunzanga kuadapt kwa environment yako, na watu wengi walikuwa wanaongea Kiluya, hawako wanaongea Kikuyu na Kiswahili, na hizo ndo vitu nilijifunza. Ukiangalia hivyo languages, there is a risk that Africa's very very rich diversity of languages, the number of languages zinaongelewa Europe ni kama 25, the number of languages zinaongelewa Africa ni kama 3000. There's a risk that these languages, Kikoikoi, Kisan, zinaweza potea, and that is a very rich part of our culture. A lot of our history is buried in our languages because our history is oral. Tukiweza kupreserve hizi languages for the future generation, it can be possible that these languages will not be lost. That is why this is important. It can be possible that mtu in the future anaweza rudi afukue hizi languages na automatically aanze kusoma na elewe culture ya the people who gave birth to the language. That is one thing. As more and more of our young people wanaongea Kiswahili, inafaa tuwasukume, at least if possible, waongee these languages, but if not possible, tujaribu ways of preserving it, these languages. And large language models are a good way of preserving languages. 2, so that is another place where AI is very good. Now, because it may learn from very, very, very many examples, sometimes AI has a better way, actually, of explaining it than a teacher. I do not see it replacing the teacher, because teachers are very important as physical instruction. Tulijaribu kufunza na Zoom ikakataa kabisa all over the world, si Kenya pekee. But I see it assisting the teacher. Healthcare, tuanze na very, very obvious things. Healthcare. Records mingi zimejaa KNH kwa mavitabu zenye watu hawajui cha kufanyia. People don't know about the general health statistics of Kenya. Juu ziko buried in thousands and thousands of pages. Enye ni ukweli, hakuna mwanadamu anaweza soma. Hata serikali ijaribu nini wapi aje, hakuna mwanadamu anaweza soma. So how about we digitize this? This is why digitization is important. And then we take it and put it into an AI system. Alafu iseme Kenya imeanza kuwa na trend fulani where we are moving from lifestyle from diseases like tropical diseases, tumeanza kuingia lifestyle diseases. And what can we do? What are the trends? Can we find interesting trends? What are the trends by gender, for example? What are the trends by region, for example? What are the trends by age, for example? Na security, OB, kila mtu nadhani kuna kila mtu hapa ameandika OB namba ama ameandikishwa OB namba juu ya kukua juu ya makesi ya kusimama kwa gari ama vitu kama hiyo. Hizo OB tunafanya nini nazo? Zimefungwa tu kwa OCPD. Tunafanya nini na hiyo information? Tunajua aje traffic offenses ziko likely ku happen wapi? Such that mapolisi wasikuwe tu wanatembea wanaranda na Land Rover. Tunajua wapi crime iko highest. Na si story ya jaba ati tunajuanga tu Kayole ni mbaya. Unaweza pata sijui wapi Doni ni kubaya kuliko Kayole, na tujaijua, lakini iko kwa OB that Doni ni kubaya kuliko Kayole. This is where AI can really help us by studying those very patterns that hatuwezi track sisi wenyewe. Juu police stations ngapi Kasarani sijui wapi zinaandika hizi maOB na hakuna mtu anazisoma. Inaweza tusaidia na intelligence yetu, intelligence service yetu. Wanasemanga the least intelligent part of any government is the National Intelligence Service. Inaweza tusaidia na intelligence gathering yetu, so that tusikue careless na security yetu. Tunaweza manage security yetu much better. Yes? And there are also applications everywhere, and I'm sure you can think of much more than me. But this is the idea. Can we manage our security, our healthcare, our education, all these other aspects of our life better using artificial intelligence? So I'll stop there because of time. Asante. So the first immediate risk, and forgive me, I'll try speak in English so that my thoughts become clearer here, because I normally sometimes I'm used to speaking in English, particularly in this regard of risks. One is a problem of, thank you very much. One is a problem of employment. Essentially, we are not sure. Essentially, let's start from the first. When new technologies arrive, I remember I was not very young when ATMs arrived, and we were told massive stories of how ATM will lead to the loss of cashier jobs, and it became a serious point of discussion in banks, in even KANU, ilikuwa siku za KANU, in KANU policy meetings. Should we allow ATMs into the country? You know, there were these very heavy debates. Ultimately, it turned out not to be that serious. And in fact, the rise of ATMs made banking cheaper, made it easier to open banks, and led to the explosion of banks, and actually led to more employment, not less, because of that. Because of the popularization of banking. The making of banking easier helped the expansion of the banking industry in the country and in the region. We are not sure that the rise of full artificial intelligence will do the same thing. There is a worry that this is the first technology where more jobs will be destroyed than created. And this will basically run our economy into helter-skelter. Let me explain using another analogy. Kuna mtu napenda kusoma anaitwa Yuval Noah Harari. He likes to use the example of the Industrial Revolution. There were people saying that the coming of cars will destroy the jobs of horse riders or carriage riders. It is true, the coming of cars destroyed the jobs of horse riders and carriage riders. But these people are the people who retrained and became some of the first drivers in history. And therefore, they benefited from the technology of cars, and they found something else to do. Because the existence of cars made the transportation of goods and services faster in the country, and therefore made the economy expand faster, and therefore there were more job opportunities, essentially. Yuval likes to say that we should not think of ourselves as the horse riders in the story. We should think of ourselves as the horses in the story. It is the one thing tuko nayo ya offer this world is our intelligence. And if we replace our intelligence, we have nothing more to offer each other. And because we have nothing more to offer each other, we will be like the horses in our economies. We will not be the horse riders. We'll be replaced like the horses. And this is a danger of employment. So far, I would say that this danger has not really come into fruition. What tunaona ni that AI is basically assisting people in their activities rather than replacing people in their activities. We do not know whether this is a short-term phenomenon. We do not know whether this is long-term. All we can do is observe, and this is one risk of AI. The second is the amount of political turbulence, social turbulence that can be introduced by AI. Kumbuka nimewaambia computers don't sleep. So a computer can generate 10,000 fake tweets like GPT-4. If you are able to get the model of GPT-4 and retrain it, it can generate 10,000 fake tweets in a minute. Very, very easily. Now, this doesn't look like a serious problem mpaka uanze kufikiria about where we come from. In Kenya, in East Africa. Remember that East Africa is a particularly turbulent region. Ethiopia sahi iko na shida, Somalia iko na shida, Sudan hapo karibu kuna shida, Horn of Africa, Congo, East Africa, Eastern Congo kuna shida. Kuna instabilities kila mahali. So what would a social network that can generate 10,000 fake tweets? Sisi Watusi wa Rwanda tumeanza kugongwa tena. Hapana, hatuwezi kubali, lazima tugongane. And it is coming from multiple accounts which look legitimate. What will happen? The Tutsis watasoma hizo tweets waanze kuona kuna shida kwa inchi. So let us do preventative war ama responsive war, juu wanaona ni kama wanapigwa war. Alafu pia hao wengine wataanza kuona sisi Wahutu mbona tunagongwa, let's respond. In a very very short minute unaweza introduce serious political instability kwa country with a very very small laptop essentially. Ukiweza kupata GPT-4. It's extremely dangerous technology, I would say. There are checks and balances zenye companies za IT na OpenAI wanajaribu. In fact, OpenAI, to be honest, wamejaribu sana. But there are still, these risks still exist. They are very real. There are open source language models right now that are performing as well as GPT-4, at least ChatGPT-3. So what happens if somebody takes this model, akuje Kenya, aanze kugenerate these tweets in a very sensitive election period? Akia Mungu, military wamependua serikali ama something like that. And it is coming from multiple sources and it is trending. Extremely dangerous technology. The third, which now is the most dangerous. I like to say intelligence does not mean that you are good. Intelligence, vile tumesema, it means its ability to learn. So one of the things that you can learn how to do is to do dangerous things. And it is very easy, in fact, it turns out, to do more dangerous things than good. It is harder to do good things. Wacha nikupe example. Kama hauko sure, try leave your son or your daughter alone for 5 to 10 years. Let him or her raise themselves. And then you will see why intelligence is inherently dangerous, not the opposite. That is intelligence working. Intelligence does not mean good. The problem ya society yetu ni that tumetrainiwa kufikiria that somebody intelligent is somebody who does good. Hapana. Na wanasiasa wetu wanatuonyesha without shadow of a doubt that intelligence does not mean to do good. Wanakuja wanatupea story mrefu, wanaenda huko kitu ya kwanza, whether wewe ni Mwangi, Otieno, Leporquen, whether wewe ni umetoka wapi, Muhammad, kitu ya kwanza wote wanafanya ni nini? Kujiongeza salary. Intelligence is not doing good. There is a difference between these two things. Sasa hiyo ndo one problem. Now, when we create very very intelligent things that are 100,000 times more than intelligent than all Kenyans combined, when we create that system, nini hiyo inatuambia that system will remain good from the point of view of human beings? Remember that we were attacked not by more intelligent people, but by a more intelligent society, the Europeans. They had learned a lot of cultural intelligence in their science and technology. They were able to attack and overrun all of us in the space of 30 to 40 years. After we had struggled to attack and overrun each other for hundreds of thousands of years. So that is what a superintelligence can do. A superintelligent society was able to attack and overrun Africa within a few decades. Superintelligence is very dangerous. What can a society of beings, of robots, of machines, of computers that are 100,000 times more intelligent than us do? They can control us and destroy us within a second. This is the idea. Intelligence is inherently dangerous. It is us to take intelligence and try to control it. What we've been talking about and the intelligences that we've interacted with mostly right now in the real world, zinaitwa narrow intelligences. For example, umetrain AI kucheza chess. Hiyo kitu haiwezi endesha gari. Haiwezi kabisa. Umetrain AI kufanya kitu moja. It is constitutionally incapable. The way iko structured, haiwezi kabisa fanya kazi ingine. So research right now inaenda direction very interesting, where tunataka AI icheze chess, iendeshe gari, ioshe vyombo, ifanye hizi vitu zote plus more, iweze kufanya multiple things kama mwanadamu, so that it can be a good assistant. There's sense in this. Uchukue AI uambie chukua hii kifungu, enda niende kwa mall hapo, niende hapo TRM, nichukulie mzigo, peleka kwa huyu, umwambie pole imechelewa, alafu urudi. You'd want such an assistant where you don't pay them anything, by the way. Sini AI yako, ni kama servant yako. This is called a general intelligence, an artificial general intelligence. Human beings, by the way, also cows, also insects, have some form of general intelligence. Naweza kula nikisoma gazeti na nikiongea juu ya siasa ya siku. Naweza fanya multiple things bila hata kustrain akili yangu, bila hata kufikiria about it. Right now naongea nikipumua na hata si notice that napumua, but najua napumua since kama singekuwa napumua ningekufa. Na hizi vitu zote ziko controlled somehow by the same brain. We want such artificial general intelligence. And then when we pump, just the same way nimekuambia that you can have language models and we can have large language models, when we have very, very powerful artificial general intelligences, this is where we start getting the artificial super intelligences. These things that now, kitu ina solve climate change, ikisolve political conflicts za Africa, inasaidia watu wa Chad kunegotiate the crisis, na watu wa ECOWAS wa negotiate crisis yao. Ina solve cancer, ikiangalia maneno ya traffic jam Nairobi na New York at the same time, na haina shida. It is just solving these problems na inapeana recommendations immediately, na ukiimplement recommendations zina work. Now this is an artificial super intelligence, the very thing we should be worried about, as Bonnie pointed out, that the two things are linked. So you know, artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and artificial super intelligence.
Thanks, Kinyanjui, for the wonderful classes. I think you've been a good teacher. We are learning a lot, and I'll try to be a little very basic. I'm a very layman in this. So thank you so much. I think this is a wonderful thing that we need to have more and more time to learn, grow together, and share knowledge as well. So I'll have a question, but maybe just a comment before the question, that from the topic of the day, we're talking about what is artificial intelligence. I think we've talked a lot about that even before when we were just starting. And should we be worried? Yes and no. I think we shouldn't be worried, because we're already living in that era where, of course, knowledge, you can never stop an idea whose time has come, and we've been living it for some time, some of us knowingly or unknowingly. And I think the world moves so fast. If you don't adjust or align yourself to the knowledge and the information, then you get left behind. So it's a good thing. It makes life easy. We are in a fast-paced world, and we really need to adapt. Yes, the other downside of it, of course, you've talked about that. Too much knowledge or too much intelligence, if not well cured, or if it's not well managed, just like freedom, I think some level of responsibility is needed, and just abundance of caution on what to be done in what manner of fashion, on how, for the good. But it can also be misused. It's just like power or any other thing. My question is coming from some area where I think I'm gaining a bit of interest in, which is about the AI-powered early cervical cancer detection. I'm trying to look at a way where we could help our society, probably where we're coming from, and this is to respect to being the lower spaces and the western side of the country. There are lots of cases of rising cases of cervical cancer and challenges to do with maybe related challenges. So there could be ways of doing early detection of cervical cancer using artificial intelligence. And this should be on the backdrop that cervical cancer has become a major cause of mortality for our mothers and aunties and our people who come from those sides of the country. And I believe there are already existing technologies for this early detection and management. And the diagnosis of these mostly done through PAP and HPV, which mainly is time consuming and a bit tedious and rather somehow manual. And so early detection that could be automated using AI, I think would be something to have interest in if it could be adopted and embedded in our society, in the health informatics, the healthcare system, the government, and even the local health facilities that we have. So I know probably there could be an area of the extreme learning machine, the EML, that you could use some intelligent algorithm or something to do some design and classification of cancerous and maybe non-cancerous patients. The challenge therein is there could be an issue of confidentiality of data, acquisition of that data, and even making this a bit more understandable or in a language that our people don't there. And of course, getting the images if you want to probably train the models and do do the detection using that kind of automated or instant intelligent algorithm. Now, two things that I want to check with you or ask if it's an area that there's something that could be done to improve it or make it better is one, how would we marry or align on the records of data, getting the probably the images or whatever confidential info that you need? Vis-a-vis, is there a way that we could have AI kind of basic kind of language or model to our old people or our people in the village who are not very learned to make them appreciate this and also bring the health practitioners and the technology together so that we can have that seamless kind of integration and then get this info, train the model, use it so that we help our people on the ground because knowledge or information without benefiting the people, I think at the end of the day, might not be very good. We could be having so many books and papers and all that knowledge gathering dust, but if you don't help or cure the problem at a very basic level, it could be a challenge. So maybe you could talk about that, and how you're seeing the landscape shaping. Is it something that we are ready for as a nation? Maybe not. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That is a very interesting question. I will try answer as much of it as I can because it's not really my specialty within AI, but I will try answer it as much as I can, especially on the applications of AI to health. So on your first sort of initial thoughts of the detection, the early detection, I thought of three possible dimensions we could look at this. One, there's a geospatial factor. As you've said, it's a very particular region of the country, which is very deeply interesting for me. Why is that prevalent in a particular part of the country as opposed to other parts of the country? I would really love to understand the underlying geospatial factors. And the reason why it is important is that it helps you make your prediction. Yeah, it helps you understand the trend, if possible, of the rates of incidents. So there's a geospatial factor. The geospatial factor could be actually connected to the second factor, which is the social network factor. There is something that is happening in these communities that are seated together and living together that is causing high incidence rates of this. So what is it and how can we, it's not enough to just say what is it. It's also important to say how can we quantify it? How can we use it to say that it predicts a specific probability for a specific community or a specific individual within a specific community given certain parameters. So these are very important sort of, we can call them environmental factors. There are other environmental factors that we need to take into account. So you start from that sort of very environmental thing, and then you start zeroing down on the individual. Given these environmental factors and these geospatial factors, geographical, I'd rather call them geographical factors, can we look at the biology now of the individual? Can we use non-invasive methods maybe? Imaging maybe? Can we make imaging as cheap as possible somehow using AI augmented skins? Can we make detection, vile tulikuwa tunaongea about the guys looking at TB from the breathing patterns? Can we do something similar? And we know that diseases, lifestyle diseases sometimes come with some co-occurring symptoms or some warning symptoms or something like that. Can we look at them and use them to predict, having taken into account the environmental factors, the probability that somebody should take more advanced tests, more detailed tests? I think AI can assist in this, doing mass tests. Second thing, you were talking about the challenges. So the confidentiality of data, of health data, which is a very, very sensitive thing, especially with people who are doing health studies, especially even in AI, and even just the acquisition, the community to allow to be investigated at such a deep and fundamental level. I'll start with the confidentiality because it has implications for the second case. If you're careless with community data, community is less likely to trust you next time you come knocking around. Wanajua tu serikali with their usual ukora. That's all they see when they see you come knocking around. So confidentiality. There are ways, and this is a very big word in AI, especially in health in artificial intelligence, but I'm not a specialist in the field, and if there is any specialist in the field, I please invite you to contribute, of anonymizing the data, na inaitwa anonymization. So you remove, the interesting thing for artificial intelligence is the patterns, fundamentally, is the patterns in the data, not the individuals bearing the patterns. So you can take these images, remove any reference of national ID, remove any reference to name, it might not be useful to remove the reference to location. Location might be useful or relevant for this purpose, and remove these words and train the model purely on the data in of itself. And then you have it learn the patterns of data, relationships between the data. So it could show you an interesting cluster of cases somewhere, sindio? And then now it is upon you to try and look, because you're the one carrying out the study, is there something interesting from the individuals who bore this cluster of data? And then you can now go and engage the community. Ultimately, AI in this case is not responsible for the data. AI did not go to ask for the data. You did. And therefore, you are responsible for the way you handle this data. AI fundamentally boils down to three things, I like saying. Input, process, and output. You have to consider, how did you get your data? Did you get your data responsibly? How did you process your data? Did you process your data in a way as to make sure that you can capture the most essential and important elements of the data? What is your output? How can you interpret your output, vile umesema, in such a way as to help community? And if not community, even just at least individuals. So these are things that you have to take into account. It's a question of methods rather than a question of fundamentally of AI itself. AI is very value independent, and it will do whatever you want it to do And that makes it dangerous. And therefore, it is the scientist, the researcher, the data scientist, the data engineer wielding the data that has to exercise responsibility.
Very much. Thank you, Kinyanjui. That was a very good presentation. I got to learn a lot of things. So I have two questions. It will come in an A and B format. My first question, is AI an expert system? That will take me to the B after you respond to that one. Is AI an expert system?
Some artificial intelligences are expert systems. Not all are expert systems. So
Okay.
all expert systems are artificial intelligence, essentially, if you define them in the formal computer science way, but not all AIs are expert systems.
Okay. In the instance where we have an AI as an expert system, we have the three parts. We have the knowledge base, the inference engine, and the user interface. And the knowledge base basically gets its data from experts on the ground. My question is, with this fact that there's human interaction with the database that is fed into the expert system or AI in this case, isn't it prone to being compromised? Because I'll take an example of internet, because not everything that we have on the internet is true. Is it prone to being compromised, or is it in a position to identify what is real or fake, what to keep and what to discard? Has AI reached that level as at now? Those were my questions.
Thank you. So, with the second question, which is much more difficult than the first question, I will say that it depends. It depends with the system. So, for example, ChatGPT as a language model, or GPT-4 formally as a language model specifically, has been able, not yet there fully, to sort of start to detect that some of the information that it has been fed is not correct by relating it with other information. Remember that I told you that computers fundamentally understand numbers, and what do they do when they are learning language is they're learning networks of words. They call them tokens, but words, basically words, and how these words relate into sentences and how these sentences relate into paragraphs. They're learning networks. Yeah. And this is the base of most of modern artificial intelligence. Patterns of numbers. And that is why artificial intelligence is very robust right now. The patterns of the structure of the AI matches or tends to have useful information with regards to the patterns of the data. Now, when you do this kind of game, yes, for example, think of it like Nairobi. You know that particular parts of River Road, you will go with your car, you will go with your phone, and you will come out worse for wear. You just know. So somehow the city organically has started adjusting itself to know that these parts of River Road are not good. There's some parts of River Road where people are very professional, and this story goes around in the city and people talk to each other. And the network called Nairobi just adjusts itself to sort of avoid certain shops, avoid certain people, and go towards certain people, like the guy, I forget the name of the guy who spray paints cars. He's very professional with his work. He does very good work. Moha Graphics. Yeah. So he does very good work. And the city has come to learn that he does very good work. And generally, when people are doing that kind of work, they tend to drift towards him and not towards other people. So similarly, there are some networks of particular sophistication which are able to do this, to be robust to attacks. Zinaitwa pole for the technical thing. It's called adversarial attacks. So attacks particularly meant to destabilize the network. They are robust to this, but some others, in fact, most of the neural networks you will see trained are not robust to this kind of attacks. So I would say it depends. The best for that is it depends on the network, on the type of architecture and the type of network.
So my question would be, who will be the best guy to, to keep the norms of the artificial intelligence? We know how corrupt the political parties are, or political class all over the world. Whom will we trust with our information in AI? Whom will we trust with the ethical issues related to AI? Those are my only questions, and I would really appreciate to hear you say something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll start with the first one, the requirements and the consciousness of GPT-4. I'll start with the requirements. As you have said correctly, you've basically used GPT-4. GPT-4 does not require any sort of coding or something like that. It just requires literacy in English or Kiswahili, and basically the effectively just opening something like a Facebook account, and you are in with GPT and you can start playing around with it. Now, to program or to build something like GPT-4 has a lot of heavy requirements, technical, conceptual requirements, infrastructural requirements that you need to do. What currently most people in the field are doing, is to fine-tune already existing models. So you take a model and you basically train it to be an expert, quote unquote, in the particular task that you would want it to be an expert. For example, you could take something like ChatGPT or GPT-4 and you could train it to speak very fluent Dholuo. For example, this can be done. This can be done essentially, and I think it is in the process of being done. Specifically for what I'm sure is the Google model class of models. I think there is a lot of progress there. With regards to GPT-4 being cautious, I have experimented with it, and what I've noticed is that it is less and less likely to venture what you're calling it cautious. It is less and less likely to venture an opinion confidently. What it has been sort of, I think, fine-tuned to do is to try and communicate the uncertainty and to try explain that there's a lot of, especially with very controversial issues, it tries and sort of pulls back from venturing a very confident opinion. Now, some people have interpreted this, and actually, there are actually objective degradations. There's a scientific paper published arguing that GPT-4 has undergone quantitative degradations in its quality of answers. I am yet to read the entire paper, so I am yet to comment usefully. And of course, I am yet to read the response of GPT-4, the ChatGPT, the OpenAI company. There are a lot of rumors that they're trying to dedicate their clusters, the computing resources, to the development of more sophisticated things. So they're sort of degrading the performance deliberately. They're using lighter models, not the large language models. They're using relatively lighter models. I'm not sure how far these rumors go. I will have to go and check where this discussion has reached, because I last followed it a few weeks ago. I would really push for, I'm sorry for using this term again, bottom-up approaches to ownership of AI technology. Yes, we need regulations. Yes, they're important, but I will really push for community-based ownership rather than government-based ownership. As you have said, governments, not just the government of Kenya, but governments around the world are very, very prone to use technology in very, very, I would say, unpalatable ways to their population. I'm sure you are now aware of the Chinese points-based systems. The United States is not any better with its national security agency trying to make predictions as to the behavior of individuals and all these things. So I would really, really push also for community-based bottom-up sort of systems where we are developing AIs to address community problems, but also address systemic problems in the country and in the continent. Both these things are important in of themselves. I would also push for AI governance. AI governance, compute governance is important because we don't want to develop dangerous systems. And we cannot, for God's sake, trust companies. Have you tried trusting Safaricom of late? So we cannot trust companies to be useful here. We want systems of AI and AI systems that ultimately benefit communities. So this pressure of civil societies pushing back against government also pushing companies also pushing back. This kind of contestation is very important, and this is what I would advocate for: AI governance at all possible levels. I like calling it fractal governance. Start from the village in governing. Don't start from State House.
Could you talk a little bit and maybe introduce it to the people? This thing called prompt engineering, because it seems to be a skill that will be important in the utilizations of these AI systems in future. If you have knowledge about it, maybe you could talk about it. And then maybe we can move to the next questions here.
I'll try to talk a bit about it. My knowledge here is quite limited, but I know the principle behind it. So I'll try to talk about the principle behind it. But I can point people to resources where they can get much more fine-tuned information. And if anyone has more information, please feel free to share. I like reading stories of Greek myths, and there was this King Midas and the golden touch. King Midas talked to the gods and told the gods, I want everything that I touch to turn into gold. The gods granted the wish, and he started touching things. I'm sure you've heard of this story. He touched his table, it turned into gold. He touched his seat, turned into gold. He was very excited. He was going to become one of the richest kings, and his kingdom was going to become one of the richest kingdoms. Until he touched a banana, touched his food, touched his his thing down there, and they all turned into gold, you see. Now the guy got into trouble. He couldn't eat, he couldn't carry out the necessary husbandry duties, he couldn't do all of these things because everything he touches turns into gold. This is the problem of artificial intelligence, large language models, in summary, that they will give you what you give them. The principle of garbage in, garbage out still applies. Always remember that a computer is about input, processes, and output. So whatever it receives, if it is poorly articulated, it will give a poorly articulated answer. If you take your time, give details, be structured, think about your problem, then communicate it to the large language model, then it is going to also take its time, think about the responses, and give useful responses. Now, there are specific technical things that come from artificial intelligence, like zero shot and all these technical things that we will not go into, and I'm also not very familiar with, but I will share maybe below the Twitter spaces some more resources that someone can get into. Now, what prompt engineering helps you is it helps you bring out the best of the AI system that you're dealing with. Just like when you open a dictionary and you don't want to find the word of anything in particular, the meaning of any word in particular, you're likely to be lost in the dictionary. Just the same way is the same way that when you open up a large language model and you start doing things there, you're likely to be lost because you don't know what you are doing. It is also very important that you have an understanding of what you're doing, and it will reflect in the quality of work. For the use of ChatGPT, I know that people are using ChatGPT to generate assignments and all these nice things, and it's making life easier. I would recommend doing the opposite, taking your time, writing your assignment, writing your whatever, writing your essay, writing your thesis, and then putting it into ChatGPT. And then now let ChatGPT first summarize your arguments. It could summarize your arguments more cogently than you, possibly. Also point out weaknesses in your reasoning. I will give you an example. I was doing a first year Viva just a few months ago. I did exactly the same thing. I took the thesis and put it through ChatGPT. And then it told me a particular sentence that says, no, there's weak support for this statement. Please try and weaken the statement. It is too categorical. I did that and gave to the supervisor just before the last submission to the thesis, and the supervisor said, yes, I thought that statement was too strong. You see, this is where ChatGPT is particularly useful to help you understand your own arguments using other words. It can be very helpful here. So I would recommend doing the opposite. Rather than using it to generate your work for you, do the work, then have it correct and fine-tune the work for you. That could be a helpful way of using the tool.
Would you comment about Africa focusing more on artificial intelligence technology rather than on preparing our data in readiness for these data-hungry models?
Where I would push the continent is to, and this is where I think we fall short, especially in science and technology. We tend to worry about the outputs of technology, the outputs of science, sometimes a bit too much. When, for example, WorldCoin comes with their whatever to Kenya, Kenya is reacting. We should ban this thing because of data problems and all these things. And then you have these people talking about colonialism and neo-colonialism and all this dramatic language. And it is well within their rights to speak this way. How about we focus on the entire thing? We know that the outputs of technology do not fall from the sky. They start from somewhere. They start from the inputs, and I will go back to this thing. Inputs, process, outputs. They start from how we handle our data. How are we handling our OB data? How are we handling KNH data? How are we handling intelligence data? How are we handling education data? That is, we have 33,000 primary schools and secondary schools. What is the data for these schools? Where is it? How are we using it? So it starts from there. Then the process, yes, which goes to how are we using this data? What are we using this data? Are we using this data? Let's start from there. And then the output. How is this data informing policy and policy formulation? How is it informing our politics about how we share resources? If we look at the data, is 1 man, 1 shilling correct? If we look at the data, and we tried doing this actually with you, Boniface, I don't know if you remember, still, Northeastern, the concentration of schools is lower than the population density in Nairobi. So do we still argue for 1 man, 1 shilling, given the data? Input, process, and output. Once we have our own robust infrastructure, and I push for the buying of computational infrastructure by African governments, please sell your V8s, buy GPUs and CPUs. Sell those V8s. They're going to be useless in a few decades. The GPUs and CPUs you build, they're not going to be useless in a few decades. Sell those V8 in this. Otherwise, you will complain Just like we complain about neocolonialism, the way our grandfathers complain about it, our grandchildren will complain about neocolonialism in exactly the same way, because our public servants cannot ride Ubers and trains. Please, please, let's sell those things and buy GPUs. Let's buy the computational infrastructure that is going to assure our culture, our models of governance going into the future. There is no other way. Sacrifice, sacrifice. The same way it's very normal for a parent to sacrifice for their child's education, we should sacrifice collectively as a people for this. I think this is something that I would really love to push. And even if we cannot afford it, the East African community definitely can afford it. It has a collective GDP of around 300 to 350 billion dollars. We can afford to have a computational intensive institute collectively. So this is what I will try to argue for. Please, please, please don't complain about colonialism while these things are within your grasp. There are a lot of specialists in AI already in Kenya. So we have the right things. Can we combine them together to get an output that is useful for us? So this is a policy direction. Yeah.
Well, hapo sawa kabisa. Thank you very much. And again, I want to thank you. No, we still have about 30 minutes or 26 minutes to go. But I just wanted to give you really heartfelt gratitude for the time you spent with us and for the wisdom. And we don't take it for granted. So we'll go with Moro and then Pope.
Community-based ownership of technology and science is something that we have been missing a lot. And this is what you call a socio-technical problem. We have always sort of alienated technology and science, and we need to start thinking of ways of which our respective communities, so that isikue, we don't want science and technology to be seen as ilikuja na meli, like English. We want our people were innovating before the Europeans came. Yeah, the European interaction with Africa is an interruption of history of Africa. It is not the beginning of history of Africa by any stretch of the imagination. You all people come from communities where drugs, medicine, all these things were known. Ikitu inatibu hii, ikitu ingine inatibu hii. That is science. That knowledge did not fall from the sky. It came from the ancestors, and the ancestors were innovating. So how we can push science and technology to sort of be owned organically by the community, such that when you go to ask for data, for example, as an earlier questioner was asking, let's look at ways of for example, getting ways of getting data from the community. If the community owns the process, there is likely to be less resistance. And I really liked what he has said. It is about how we use the technology. Technology is never, you can use an email to plan a terrorist attack. You can use an email to apply for a scholarship. It is you to decide how to use this technology. The responsible technology outcomes come from responsible technology use cases. It is not magic. As to the employment problem, we really do not know where the employment, let's call it paradox, okay, will go with the case of AI. We don't know whether it will wipe out employment in the long term, or it will explode the economy and make it very vibrant and create much more opportunities in the long term. We really just don't know, because it is the beginning phases of this technology. If we learn from history, the latter is more likely. It is likely to create more than to destroy jobs. But do we learn from history here? When we are replacing cognitive tools, do we learn from history here? Is history a good guide here? Remember that history is not always a good guide. So that is a question that I think I will leave for you to think about. And maybe people should let us know their opinions. Yeah, I don't have good opinions there. Thank you, Pop. That is a very, very interesting question. So yes, we are pushing for the embracing of technology in our schools. But and some people still blame the Kenya education system for this. We still don't have calculators in class one, and it's for a very good reason. Yeah, that we don't have calculators in class one. So a line was drawn somewhere. How this line was decided, I really don't know. It's beyond my pay grade. But in the case of ChatGPT, do you want a class one to have ChatGPT, access to ChatGPT, as they're learning to compose their sentences in English and Kiswahili? Do you want them to have this technology? My answer would be probably no. And this is where I would draw the line. Somebody who is still trying to learn to master how to basically express themselves through writing, through speaking. Maybe it could assist in some ways, and maybe Juma will contribute here because Juma is working in the education technology sector. Where I would rather, instead of drawing the line, I would rather schools adapted. Yeah. For example, instead of having university students write essays, how about we conduct mock vivas or mock interview like situations for them? So feel free to use ChatGPT in writing your report, very good, but you will come and explain to people live vile huwa tunasema what you have worked on and why what you have worked on is important, and you will respond to questions. Maybe this is a better way of assessing, because in any case the industry does not depend on your essays. When you go for an interview, I have never gone for an interview where I have been asked to write an essay. I don't think anyone has gone. But I've gone to interviews where I've been asked to explain my life, my background, and why I'm passionate about what I'm passionate about, and what I'll help the company with, or the university, or whatever with. Those interviews I've gone through. So maybe this is a better way of testing people, testing their output by vocals and audio visuals and physical reality, rather than marking scripts. Maybe this is what this technology will teach us. Yeah. So maybe universities should adopt their systems of examination, which they have been told to adopt for a very long time anyway, and they did not listen. And now we have a system that literally blows everything off the water.
Okay, thank you, James, host, and the whole team. So I just have a question or two to Carringtone. First, I just want to appreciate the role that these AI or computational models, whatever they are doing, specifically in STEM. So I'm somehow classical, but I understand that AI is doing some things in maybe science, from quantum simulations to spectral analysis, material science, and whatever. But from what I know is that what you guys do, the Carringtone and the AI team, you depend on a lot of data, especially if you talk of science from the lab. So my question is, do you believe or think that there's going to be a point where that we have trained these AI models to the extent that we need not to go to the lab, to the extent that they can just work without us going to the lab? Because for maybe people in STEM, most of the times going in lab is tedious. So that's the first question. And then the second question also aligns with almost the first question. How far do you trust this AI in STEM? Because for some of us, we have worked with these models, maybe ChatGPT and whatever, but sometimes they give you what you just know it's outrightly wrong. So how much do you need to trust them? Cheers.
Thank you very much. And definitely I'd invite Bonnie and Juma to also contribute their personal understanding of this, because they're also practitioners in the interacting fields of AI and science. First, to your question of the applications of AI in scientific research, to the point of where we would abandon basically going to the lab and whether there's a possibility of this. Fundamentally, I am an empiricist. I think we have to always ground our understanding of the world on as much data of the world as we can get. It is very, very easy to fool yourself. I come, as I said, I sort of come from the mathematical side of physics. The issue is that there are very, very many possible mathematical ways of describing reality, of describing the universe, of describing even Earth. And there's only one possible way the Earth exists. I suspect I might be wrong. Time might come to prove me wrong later on. I suspect that it will be a similar case with neural networks. That yes, they can learn the patterns of nature, just like they can learn the patterns of images. But ultimately, for us to ground truth, the correct patterns of nature, we have to be aware of the data. Remember that these models themselves are, somebody called them sort of inferential engines. These models also learn. Part of the thing they do is inference, but they also deduce. They build models from data. It is true, they do that. But they are also data-based. And therefore, ultimately, their ability to reach an understanding of their data will be based on their ability and how much data that they have received. I will refer you to a particular interesting case where there was a system, basically a neural network, an artificial intelligence that was fed data of our planets, our solar system, in something called geocentric coordinates. Geocentric just means going round, geocentered, going round the Earth. And this is an example I like using. So it is data of planets going round, moving as if they are going around the Earth. You can do this. You can create data like this. After digesting and digesting and digesting the data, the model was so uncomfortable, or I don't want to use psychological terms. I'm really sorry I'm using psychological terms, but it was easier for the model to recenter the data around the sun, called heliocentric coordinates. And then it was able to make predictions easier and much more robustly. So what has this model learned? That is, it is easier to understand solar system motions as going round the sun than as going round the Earth. It did what we took, or at least Europeans, took a few centuries to figure out. Some African tribes had figured it out. The interesting stories here. So, are we going to generalize this thing? Are we going to feed it all the data in the world, and then somehow it tells us, I don't know, for those of you who watch Big Bang Theory or something, string theory of Sheldon is wrong or something like that automatically, it just knows. And how do we interpret what is going on in its quote unquote brain for it to say that, so that we can also understand the logic behind it concluding that some very sort of quantum mechanics, you've talked about quantum theory, quantum simulations, quantum mechanics is incorrect or incomplete. How do we understand what is going on in its head so that we can be sure of the result? For both these reasons, I will answer your second question. We can maybe use these models, but we will never be fully able to trust them to completely do our science for us. Maybe they will get to artificial superintelligence where they can do our science for us, but we are very, very far from there right now. We are sort of just now teaching them to do science. They learn very fast, that is for sure. And I really hope that they're able to take us, because what they can do is like be a compass, give us a general direction where we should be pursuing further investigations in science. This is where I see the role of AI in science in the short term. In the long term, I really don't know. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Carrington. I think, James, we are out of time now, right?
Yes, we are.
Actually, I wanted to add on to something that Kinyanjui was saying. I've actually posted something on the Jumbotron and even on the comment. Google is taking advantage of their AI to do protein modeling. It's something to do with computational biology. And it's main.
We discussed that, right?
Yeah, you talked about it. Yeah. So I just posted it. And some of it, whatever they're talking about, is that they were developing proteins that could be used as antibiotics for drug research. And then I think also Facebook also has something to do with the soil. So the soil protein, yeah, the kind of proteins found in the soil. So they're also doing some models about it. Anyway, people are doing different things. Actually, even TikTok recently was trying to employ some AI people and quantum people because they're trying to do something to do with computation and all that. So there's a lot of applications that is being done currently. Yeah, just what I wanted to add. Hey, Dr. James.
I just want to return back to the host and thank you very much for the time. And I do think that part 2 is really in order here, because I think that everything that Kinyanjui has said, and we want to also welcome Juma next time so that we can have a more robust topic on application, especially for education, and how we can enhance our careers. Asante sana Dulu Spaces.
Thank you very much, my co-host James and beyond, and much thanks to Carrington for giving us your time and sacrificing the good times in Maralal to be with us this late evening. I really appreciate that. And much thanks to our listeners who have been with us since we started the space, and people who have asked questions, the speakers who have come. We really appreciate your effort. We couldn't have this space without you. This is one in out of many series to learn some of the key technologies and even key topic. Before I give Carrington a parting shot, I will appreciate if Carrington, you can also tell us about what's cooking with Kisima. You shall give us maybe a brief background. Maybe there could be people interested in supporting you in one way or the other. And I think it generally aligns with what these Twitter Dolo spaces are doing in terms of enhancing education in Luo Nyanza. So tell us about your Kisima project before you give us a goodbye. Thanks.
Thank you very much for giving me some small time to talk about this. We are in Maralal because we are interested in, we are particularly disturbed by rural-urban inequalities in technical education and scientific education. There are some parts of Nairobi, not all parts, but there are some parts of Nairobi which you can basically receive a quality of training in IT, ICT, computer science, machine learning, artificial intelligence that is comparable to parts of the world, the best parts of the world. Yes? And in the same country, there are some people, very, very talented people who do not meet computers until they're in their 20s or 30s or something like that. So swali yenye najiuliza ni kama tunaweza pea watu computer at their 10s or 5s or teenagehood, or give them electronics equipment, give them telescopes, give them books, for example, at this very young age, especially for rural communities in the country and in the continent, because this is our target. what can that do? What would that do for the continent? Because we are basically half of our population in Kenya, and in some countries it's even higher in Africa, is in rural areas. So if we choose as a society, through our governments, through our companies, to forget rural societies, to forget small town societies, aren't we doing ourselves a disservice? We are shooting ourselves in the foot and then forcing ourselves to walk economically as giants. We are not going to be able to walk. So we want to address these rural urban inequalities in education, specifically technical education. And we started with here Maralal as a pilot project. We are partnering with Transcend of Juma, giving them the equipment they need. We are looking for passionate young people. Juma is an extremely passionate and very young person. He'll tell you his age if he's comfortable, but he's sort of doing very, very advanced things in Marala. And this is what we want. We want people who can drive changes in their own communities. So we are willing to partner with anyone. I think the next one, tunaingia Kakamega, just a few kilometers beyond Kakamega. We are going to open a small library there and makerspace. A makerspace is where young people can come together and implement electronics ideas, implement their ideas in AI, in software, all these things, sort of like iHub ndogo kila mahali kwa country. I know the government is talking about doing such things. I hope they really do, because it will be very important and will take a load off our shoulders. But since we don't trust the government, and this is a general rule of life, we are going to proceed with our work. Yes. So next time to go Western, and we are trying to look for sort of small cyber cafes that are almost close to being closed, because cyber cafes zimeacha kuwa useful. We turn it into a small makerspace because the computers already exist. Sasa unaongeza tu shelf, unaweka vitabu. And please feel free. Nobody owns this idea. Feel free to implement it in your community. You add some shelves, put some books, buy some electronics kit, and then you look for a young man mwenye amechangamka who can start training and taking it out in the schools nearby, sort of mobile science clinic or something like that. And in every school there are at least 10 people who will be interested. And if these 10 people get together, get further training, maybe in Nairobi, maybe outside the country, and come back to their communities. This is how communities uplift themselves. CMCA, CMP, I have stopped believing in these things. These people are interested in the status quo. I'm sorry if there are any politically linked people, mi naongeanga tu. But I'd rather it be bottom up. Real bottom up. So where communities are literally sitting down and discussing, haya tuko na shida ya cattle rustling, maybe Juma atawaambia kitu hapa. How do we solve it using the knowledge that is in the community? And right now kuna community library. Nini tunaweza fanya address our agricultural problems? Our fishermen are getting lost in the lake. What can we do to rescue our fishermen quickly, to respond quickly to our fishermen's distress call? Asking yourselves those questions from that level ya the community, because ni nyinyi ndo mnaumia mkipoteza hawa watu. Ruto hajali, our politicians don't care. Not that they don't care, sometimes they can even care. By the way, Ruto can care, lakini sasa hajui. Literally, they don't know what is going on in the community. So it is the community to take responsibility for itself. So we are trying to equip communities with these tools to tell you that your problems are not beyond you. Si lazima ulilie serikali. Can we depend on ourselves to solve some of the problems that we have? This is the idea, empowering communities from the real bottom up. Yeah, that is what I will say to that. So we are in Maralal carrying out a pilot project. Asante.
Thank you very much, Carrington, once again. And I think Dr. James is always big on uplifting the community. He has been doing that. Part of his research also is built around that. He has been to Uganda for that reason. So he's very, very much into capacity building of these local or rural communities. So that brings us to the end of today's discussion. Once again, thank you Carringtone, thank you. Beyond, thank you. James, speakers and listeners. Until next time, bye-bye.